Redditors who have been in a coma, did you dream about anything during that period? If so, what about? I was in a coma after a car accident. I only remember one thing. I was walking down a street. I fell to my knees while coughing. I grabbed at my throat. I looked down and saw my esophagus on the ground. I then fell onto my side. I learned later that was probably my vent tube coming out of throat. Actually, this is kind of neat, because it means that, on some level, your brain understood that something you relied on for air was being removed. Either that, or it just hurt like a mofo. Not me, but my father. My father was in a coma for 3 months and had a repeated dream of a bear stealing his potato chips. Sorry dad, in a coma. Chips are for kids. I was in a medically induced coma for a week and a half courtesy of a car accident. My family was at my bedside the entire time. Whenever I would move, they would calmly say to me that I had been in a bad car accident. I was okay, and I was in a hospital. In my dreams I was going about my daily business of college classes and coffee houses. The twist would be that I was introducing myself as having been in a bad car accident but I was okay and in a hospital. Or in class I dropped a pen because my arm hurt and the student in front of me says that of course my arm hurts because I was in a bad car accident, and so on. These morphine dreams varied and were many, from the surreal to the mundane. Then I had the realization that if I've been in a bad car accident that I should go to the hospital. So, in my dreams I walk into the local college town's hospital, politely check into Tridge saying, "Hi, I've been in a bad car accident but I'm okay and I wanted to get checked out." That's when the nurses and doctors descended upon me in a life-saving frenzy. After that I opened my eyes. Weird how the timing always seemed to line up like that for dreams. I worked as a neurosurgery nurse for 3 years. I worked with a number of comatose patients and I assumed they would hear me. I always told them what I was doing to them, the kind of day it was, complimented them in any little way. When I think about it, I could carry on a fairly long conversation with them. I hope they didn't mind my ramblings. I spent 10 days in a medically induced coma following the birth of my youngest son. He will be 3 years old this September. When I woke up I remember being very upset about a conversation between 2 nurses that took place in my hospital room while I was sleeping. I've always wondered if that conversation really happened or if it was a dream nightmare. Before I entered a coma, fell from the 2nd story of a gym under construction and landed on my head. I had watched The Grudge, so during the whole coma, I dreamed that I was trapped in a completely white room with the Grudge girl. She never moved and just stood there. But when I woke up from that coma, I refused to close my eyes for a couple of nights from fear. That is the worst possible outcome, maybe with the exception of death. I hope I'm not too late and people see this. I was in a medically induced coma for almost a month due to hypertrophic cardiomyopathy. I had a lot of dreams while under. I got sick very quickly. 1 week sore chest pains, next week having CPR for 20 minutes. Everything a few days before I crashed is very cloudy. Anyway, the dreams. Everything I dreamt was revolved around me being sick or in hospital, so I knew that much. I had a dream about getting dragged under the ocean. They were taking me somewhere I could be fixed and that was the best mode of transport. I remember being in a hospital out in the desert and an army of bone poverty stricken people invading the hospital wanted to be helped, banging on doors yelling to be let in. I dreamt that the light fixture they could move around above the bed was what was feeding me pills. I could see them falling down the arms of the light. I also dreamt that I was in a room with a pyramid of boxes that I could walk up and choose, and each one took me to a different time place with one of my friends or family and I could watch over what was happening. I also remember this one with a big buffed up black guy all oiled up yelling "pump it up" while exercising, trying to keep me alive. A day after one of my surgeries to have an LVAD implanted, I came out of the operating room and I had developed a clot in my left leg that day, still under. I dreamt about some big machine getting close to my leg and it was going to cut it off if I didn't get out of the way, but I was stuck and couldn't move. I don't remember what happened with that dream, but when I finally woke up my family said that I got the clot and if the surgeon couldn't remove it I was probably going to have my leg amputated. One that really hit that I can't remember if I've told anyone, but I just remember being in a coma for over 9 years and finally waking up to my wife and seeing my 9-year-old son for the first time while in an ambulance, and I kept dropping in and out. of the coma not being able to communicate with them. I have plenty more from the same coma, a few I've never told anyone. I hope people read this. Good day Reddit. I had bacterial meningitis when I was 8 years old. I remember the moments leading up to it, feeling sick, coming home from school, and climbing into bed, and the coming out of it phase. I remember having to pee really bad, and asking to go to the restroom. I was informed I could not get out of bed, and bedpans were available. I'm a chick, which I refused. Who knows if I peed the bed or what after. Having no context of what the time frame was, my memory of coming out of it for good. I remember waking up in which I can only describe as a dark room full of old people in beds. It was the IQ unit. I remember her asking my mother why she didn't wake me up for Saturday morning cartoons. Where was I? Why was I at the hospital? I was in a coma from Friday morning to Tuesday evening-ish. It was very surreal. I am now a nurse, and when I think back about how this all happened, I wonder how much of it was dreaming memory, and how much was real. If I had to pee, why? As I most likely would have been fully cafed, etc. Was I really surrounded by old people in a black room? I think about my medical knowledge now, and how different it was in 1984. Back then everything was so different and primitive I guess. When I entered nursing school I was floored to see everything on computer and tablets, as I hadn't been in a hospital since that time. Sorry for bad punctuations grammar. Typing on a laptop is difficult for me. I spent 3 months in a coma due to hitting a goal post during soccer practice. The coach had put the goals closer together for more physical contact and technique training. Their goalie had a wicked shot and could reach our goal with ease from theirs, so he gave it a shot. I ran as fast as I could backwards while keeping an eye on the ball. The last thing I personally remember is thinking, I wonder where the goal is, and then turning my head. According to my team I ran straight into the post and flopped over like a dead fish. No reaction, nothing. The impact of hitting the post with that speed and me turning my temple into it caused my brain to expand. They drilled a hole in my head to relieve pressure. When I awoke the doctor told me around the 2-month mark it wasn't looking promising. Month 3 I woke up, recalling exactly how practice went. The headaches afterwards of trying to process that yesterday wasn't actually yesterday but 3 months ago were awful. I have no recollections of any dreams during that time. It's very cliche but during my slow process of waking up my mom's yelling still sounds like it was yesterday sometimes. I remember it very vividly. Doctor came and told me that if I hadn't turned my temple I wouldn't have been there 3 months out cold, but that I was lucky to be alive. In the process I destroyed several eye nerves and the snail shell shaped thing in your ear that keeps fluids that control your balancing. English isn't my mother tongue, sorry. It got damaged and I lost 2/3 RDS of the fluid. Other than a week or so of physiotherapy I had no damage to my brain or memory. TLDR. Zero memory of any dreams, but did remember the incident like it was yesterday. For future reference, the snail-shaped part you were referring to is your cochlea. This is my first Reddit post, so bear with me. Background: I was in the hospital for 3 months with bacterial pneumonia. I had renal and pulmonary failure. There was not much hope for survival. They had me in a medically induced coma in order for my body to have a shot. Apparently I fought it with everything I had. I tried to rip the breathing tube out of my mouth and had to be tied to the bed so I wouldn't succeed. When I came to, I wrote "Welcome to Jeopardy" on a pad of paper with my limited motor skills at the time. I was terrified that they were going to amputate my leg and I was convinced that it was going to happen or had already happened, but the doctors and my parents were afraid to tell me. I tried to be strong and not upset anyone else because my family had been through enough, so I was going to accept the amputation and I would be okay. It took me 3 days once I was awake to ask about my leg. They all looked at me like I was crazy. No, they were not going to amputate my leg. Why would they do that? I found out that in the next room over, there was a gentleman who was diabetic and they were going to amputate his leg, and I heard that when I was in the coma and assumed they were talking about me. Had surgery to fix my collapsed right lung. No amputations. Also, I dreamt that I was in jail for a DUI in Virginia and I was in a car accident after hitting a cow, so that is why I hurt. Another dream was that God and Satan were battling for my soul, but it was all in anime. It was in black and white as well. Oh, and there was a bunny rabbit that wanted to kill me that lived in the television, and it would attack if the TV was on. And the final dream I remember was that I was in Ocean City, MD, and I went on the haunted house ride. Well, the ride was a front and they would kidnap random people on the ride. I was kidnapped and they forced me to lay on the cold cement floor wearing a backless latex jumpsuit. The pain and ache of being on the cold floor gives me chills to this day. I was then sold to a graduate student who was doing some sort of 24-hour-a-day weaving. The weaving was on my back and it was in public for everyone to see me suspended while they wove thread through my back to make a weird design. I was suspended from hooks into my skin while this was happening. I assume that this was due to the doctors stitching me up after the surgery. Till, had pneumonia, almost died, had weird trippy dreams incorporating things that were discussed or happened around me. Another dream was that God and Satan were battling for my soul, but it was all in anime. It was in black and white as well. Oh, and there was a bunny rabbit that wanted to kill me that lived in the television, and it would attack if the TV was on. Sounds like a pretty typical anime to me. Or maybe a David Lynch film. Either way, I want to see it. Neighbor's kid was in a bad accident and was in a medically induced coma. The doctors said that he might be able to hear what they said, so sound upbeat, talk to him, play his favorite music, sports, etc. He liked Elvis, so they played his CDs almost non-stop. When he finally awoke from the coma, he thought he was Elvis. It took a long time for him to accept the truth. He had a very long recovering because of his traumatic brain injury. He now works as an Elvis impersonator. 100% the truth. Everyone thinks I'm making it up when I tell them. I was in a coma from July 2006 to December 2006. I got on the back of an ATV with a helmet that was too large and a drunk guy driving us back to our campsite in the dark. Hit a tree. I flew off a 200 feet cliff. And was in a coma for several months with no dreams I can recall. Life felt very dreamlike once I woke from the coma and the memories are hazy, but that's mostly due to the brain trauma and heavy hospital drugs. No near-death experience or crazy Alice in Wonderland dreams. No near-death experience. You flew off a 200 feet freaking cliff and landed in a 6-month freaking coma. When I was considered medically dead, I couldn't hear anyone. I was in a huge white room with no walls, just a floor. The floor would occasionally sparkle far off. I could not move. I could just look around. It was completely empty. I could still feel emotions. I had a heavy feeling of being nervous, worried. It felt like I was sneaking into a place where I did not belong, like a part of the house that was off limits to me as a kid. Time went by so slowly. I felt every second of it. It was only for 4ish minutes, but it definitely felt that long. I could not think. I just felt. It was the most terrifying experience of my life. I felt helpless. Everything was out of my control. I felt trapped. I don't remember, but when I was revived I screamed for minutes. I just screamed and cried. It was a short coma, a couple days, following a craniotomy. A lot of the dream terror was a linear progression of time. All of the people had emotionless faces with dead eyes, no personality or life behind the eyes. Oddly, a lot of those people I saw in the terror dream were random people from my past. An example, some guy I never talked to but often saw on campus 25 odd years ago kept popping up. I never met anyone I knew was such as friends or family, and as I said, no one interacted with me. Although they would look me in the eye, with their empty eyes. I wandered down endless hospital corridors of my mind trying to get out. They were freaking long, epic hallways with locked doors. I would struggle past these random people from my life trying to find a way out of the endless, bland, white corridors. One time I got through a door that led up steps which opened onto the roof of the hospital, but then I trapped on the roof with a starless night. No way off the roof, and more of those soulless bit players from my life. I also recall feeling the forces of good and evil fighting over me. I really hated that. Once, during a battle, I looked evil full in the eye in order to understand what it really was, and it was ignorance. Hospital drugs and a damaged brain made for interesting terrors that I never want to deal with again. I wouldn't recommend it. That's a fascinating lesson about evil you learned. I was out for almost 10 days in a diabetic coma caused by hypoglycemia, and I do not remember anything from the moment I went to bed that night to the day I woke up drenched in sweat and feeling so cold in the hospital bed. I totally blacked out in those 10 days. Don't remember dreaming or even existing during that time. The first thing I noticed when I came around was the nurse telling me I was at the hospital and to take it easy. I had tubes in my nose and up my dong and lines in my arms. I couldn't believe I was there. 6 months ago, I almost died from bacterial meningitis and was in a coma stupor a little over 2 weeks. I remember very little. What I do remember comes in brief flashes. I recall, at some point looking up and seeing someone in a gown and mask looking over me, and being able to recognize my father's eyes, then thinking that at least I wasn't going to die surrounded by strangers. During a brief moment of lucidity, I recall a lady telling me that the doctors were doing everything they could, that I need to rest. I asked who are you? It was my mom. I just didn't recognize her. I was in the hospital for over 60 days. The first 3 weeks I had many visitors, but kinda remembering 1 or 2. At some point, a tourniquet was left on my arm for 4 days, causing me to have a stroke. I was put in a medically induced coma because of that for 2 days and have absolutely no memories of those 2 days. The meningitis coma was different from the medically induced coma. The meningitis coma was strange because I have some memories of dreams, although not many, and there were a few times that I did wake up for a few minutes, but not for the medically induced coma. Before I was put into the med-induced coma, I suddenly felt like I was hit in the head by a sledgehammer. I got hot, confused, had a ringing in my ears, blurry vision. Next thing I know, I wake up, and my family explains what happened. It sucked. Bad. It's also kinda hard to explain. Sorry this was so long, but I finally have something to contribute. If anybody wants to know more, just ask. Thank you for reading. Not me, but a friend of mine had some serious complications due to his chemotherapy, so they had to induce a coma for a few months when we were both 16. I asked him if he dreamed when he was in the coma and he said the following. I remember it was a very long dream. First it was a nightmare. I was being chased by all these Chucky dolls with knives who were trying to murder me. Eventually though, the dream shifted and Jesus came to me. He explained that he would take me to heaven if I was ready. My parents were there and they were very sad that I was going to leave them, and I remember thinking about it a lot and weighing all the options. But I finally decided I was going to go with Jesus. When I told Jesus I was ready, he smiled at me and said, "Sorry, it's not your time." He then went up into the sky and disappeared into light. I was very upset because I was ready to go. Then I remember waking up and 3 months had passed. Should also be noted that he and his family are Catholic and very religious. This obviously reaffirmed everything he believes. He went on to be a doctor. So what did they say to the parents? Takes off mask. "I'm sorry Mr. and Ms. Blank. There were some complications due to the chemotherapy. We think the best course of action would be to turn him off and then back on." Had a friend in a car wreck who said that while he was unconscious, he was aware of his body and the position that it was in. He was frustrated that in the never-ending dream, he was laying down and unable to stand upright. I had heart failure from endocarditis and needed to be in a medical coma for a few days. I don't remember anything, but apparently I had tears run down my face when my mom talked to me. One thing I do remember is that when I woke up, I was asked the year, what president we have, and do you have a spirit animal UHH. Apparently that never happened, and I just have 2 cats. I'm not a furry, I promise. For some reason, the doctors kept partially waking me up to prevent PTSD. I'm not sure how it works exactly, and I have PTSD, but the coma didn't bother me much until I realized a week later that my mortgage was due, but I lost a few days, and how the heck? I was hit by a car while rollerblading back when I was 11 years old. I suffered severe head trauma that resulted in internal bleeding and pressure on my brain. I was in a coma for 4 days following the surgery to relieve the pressure. The last thing I remember was stepping out of my front door a few hours before the accident. From then on, I remember the screaming of a small child in a nearby bed, who, I found out later, didn't make it. The constant and annoying beeps of the machines in IQ. The never-ending, harsh, incredibly bright fluorescent light kept on 24 hours per day above my bed. through my eyelids, I suppose. Hating the O2 stat they kept putting on my finger. The removal of my catheter. A fat nurse who wore pink scrubs. Not sure how I knew. And that she was very rough with me. Bits and pieces of conversations my family had around me. I was remarkably aware of my surroundings, judging by these memories, but wasn't aware enough to know that I couldn't respond to them, so it wasn't scary or anything at the time. I would not liken it to being paralyzed and unable to respond. These are simply memories. As I slowly came out of it, over the course of day 4, I could start moving my fingers, then my hands. I could squeeze my family's hands if they squeezed mine, but still couldn't open my eyes, talk, smile, or do anything else. I kept forcing the O2 stat off of my middle finger, and when the nurse asked me, "Well, which finger do you want it on?" I gave her a thumbs up to indicate my thumb. This was a big turning point for everyone. They cried out of sheer joy. When I finally came to, I remember it being like coming out of a deep sleep. Not the refreshing kind, the kind that leaves you drowsy and wanting more sleep. I refused to believe that I was in a hospital and was hit by a car. Not me. That kind of stuff happens to other people. I regained full consciousness over the course of the next few hours. I was lucky enough to remember everything, everyone, and not need any physical therapy to get around. In my opinion, from my own experiences, I would always recommend talking to someone if they are out cold or in a coma, even if it doesn't seem like anything is getting through. If the brain is alive, it is processing information. Memories are being formed, even if they aren't retrievable later. My family and nurses were amazed by what I knew while I was unresponsive. It just might be that little extra push or that extra level of comfort that someone needs. I've been in a coma for almost 3 days, and nope, I don't remember having any dreams. The doctors didn't know what was wrong with me. I collapsed in class with froth in my mouth and all. Didn't remember anything. Doctors told my parents that I'm either going to die or become a vegetable. Turned out it was H1N1 that luckily did not affect the brain. Rough times. This happened a few years back. Did not affect the brain, actually. My dad, who was run over when he was 10 and was in a coma for 2 weeks, said he used to be able to taste the food that he was being fed. I asked him if it tasted bad, but he insists it was lovely. Just like Tahiti. I worked in corrections for quite a bit. We had one inmate, 23 years, black male, that was in full renal failure from years of massive drug abuse. He was put into an induced coma and was not expected to ever wake up. Still, as an inmate, we had to have an officer on him. I got him nightly for a week. First night I was there, the nurses asked me to remove his restraints so they could weigh him. I left the blanket and his ankle irons had embedded into his skin due to the swelling. Guy had been there for over a month, and no one ever checked his shackles. I'm talking to him as I remove them, telling him I was sorry that some people didn't do their job correctly. We also were not allowed to have TVs on in the hospital, but since we were in ICU, I figured what the heck. I put on Animal Planet and would tell him what was going on. Months later, I get sent back to sit on an inmate. IT ended up being the same guy. He had woken up and was making remarkable recovery. I walked in there, I did not realize it was him yet, and started talking to him, asking what treatments he had coming up, pill or scan wise. He started to cry, really cry. He said he recognized my voice and had thought I was an angel. Not the first time an unconscious inmate thought I was an angel. One legit slipped and busted his head open. Could see skull. No guard would go near him. I gloved up and held his head together while talking to him. Saw him a few weeks later and he cried, saying that he told his bunkmates about the angel talking to him, and they told him it was me. TL. Dr. Bean called an angel by comatose patients. Excuse the long story. Been up 24 hours with a newborn that prefers his daddy over me. You are everything that is right with humanity. Thank you for your decency. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video. Bye for now.